Peter, 5 minutes.
Less, I hope. The knife at the throat was not used. And that is the point of the story. Why else is it told? One of the fascinating things about those who seek to sweep Christianity out of this society, and one of the things in Kristen's book which is actively repellent, and the only thing in the book which I found actively repellent was a suggestion that Christianity should be treated as a form of child abuse and therefore driven out of education. One of the things these people do not seem to realize is that if you were to abolish it, it would not be replaced by a blank space. It is important to realize what it replaced. That the argument about that sacrifice was an argument about getting rid of human sacrifice and child sacrifice, then common. That what we are dealing with here is an immensely powerful force in human emotion, which existed before Christianity, and which Christianity sought and seeks to divert elsewhere. You have to give people hope when they have done things whose remembrance is grievous and whose burden is intolerable. It has to be done. And what other hope can be offered than some kind of sacrifice? The arguments, the very complex arguments about that atonement, are all to do with the discovery, as I said earlier, the attempt that we make in our feeble way to discover what it is that we are intended to do. But to mock them as if they were a matter of a man sticking a knife towards his son's throat with the idea that this was a recommended action in the manual of life is not really a misunderstanding, it's falsehood. And really shouldn't be acceptable in civilized debate to speak as if something is being advocated when it is actually being preached against. And it is, this failure of understanding of the purpose of the thing, the failure to understand that it has any good or benevolent characteristics whatsoever. When it does produce good characteristics, in the book you will find that those who are Christians who do good things are recruited to the atheist cause. No, they didn't do it because they were Christians, they did it because they were something else. And if societies do anything bad, then the Stalinist state of the Soviet Union is said to have done those things because Stalinist communism was in fact a form of religion. You can't win. It's completely secular. There is nothing that anybody can do which is religious and which is based on a belief in God, which Christians will think is right, and if anybody does anything which is wrong, then it will be God's fault. And there is no escape from this circle, and I think it's very well exemplified in this misrepresentation of one of the central stories in the Bible.
Well, my fellow sheep-like Americans, is it not the case that in the matter of the Eid, the Muslim sacrifice, or in the matter of the Abrahamic sacrifice of Isaac, that the first test the father must pass is to show his God that he's at least willing to do it, that his submission can be taken for granted, even to this extent? Is there anyone here who does not think that that is the grandeur of the story, as well as what I would describe as the horrible sadomasochistic submission? Only then, only when he's shown, yes, I will do it, that's how much I love Big Brother, only then is he released from the obligation. This is the torturing. This is even worse than the book of Job. It's even worse than the toying by the dictator of the fate and emotions of one of his effortlessly made creatures. Anyone who loves this loves to be a slave. Now, on the point of morality, my brother has written very well in England and indeed elsewhere about the awful nihilism and relativism that has poisoned so much of our social and national and collective life. And I have more agreement with him on this than perhaps he understands, but to say that this is to be equated with atheism is simply to misunderstand what nihilism and relativism mean. And that's very... I think I can make this point relatively simply. Someone who says that do what you will must be the whole of the law, that's supposedly what Satanists say at their ceremonies. By the way, Satanists are not atheists by definition. Their satanic majesties are not non-entities. Is giving themselves permission to act entirely as they might wish, at their own pleasure. How does the person who says, God is on my side, act? I don't demand an answer from you, I simply demand you think about my question. How do those act who say, God is on my side? Do they not act as if, do they not behave in Iran, in Iraq, in Bombay, in Beirut, in Belfast, as if they have the right to do anything at all because God has given them permission? Yes, they do. You don't get rid of nihilism. You don't get rid of relativism by claiming you have God in your corner. Rather, you make it possible for any torture, any cruelty, any child abuse, any nightmare of violence and shame to be yours and to be proud of it too. Now, I have two challenges that Peter has despised in the past, but I'm going to repeat them to you, and you decide what you think. If you think that morality must be supernaturally referred, that without heavenly dictatorship we would not have a moral guide, you must have an answer to this question, which I've now asked in print many times, in public many times, radio, TV, any number of times, not yet had an answer to. Name me moral action performed, or moral action recommended, or moral statement made by a believer. Name me one, by a true believer in religion, that could not have been made by a non-believer. Name me one. Think about it. I'm not demanding an answer now. You have all evening. However, you won't need all evening for my corollary question. Name me a wicked statement, or a stupid or evil statement made, or stupid or evil action performed by someone claiming God's permission to do so. You've already thought of one. Before this evening is over, you'll have thought of two or three more. The connection between religion and morality proposed by the believers in supernatural dictatorship is thoroughly, utterly, morally null and void. In fact, it's worse than that. It is an excuse for, and has always been, continues to be and will be, an excuse for worse evil than any secularist or atheist could ever have permitted themselves or others. Glad you got that point.
Peter.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, I can think of actually an instance of something which a believer did and an unbeliever didn't do, which is that a few years ago I resigned from my newspaper when it was taken over by a man whose main business was pornography. And I was surprised the other week to see a copy of another sister newspaper owned by that same man being adorned by a column written by my brother.
I didn't get that bit. Do you mind saying it again?
I don't mind at all. You may remember.
I just didn't hear it. I'm not trying to be funny.
Okay, no. I resigned, if you recall, from the Daily Express about 7 years ago when it was taken over by a man whose main business was pornography. I was slightly surprised a few weeks ago to find that a column written by you appeared in one of his newspapers.
But that isn't a response to either of my challenges, is it? I mean,
you asked for one.
I submit myself to the arbitration of the audience. That doesn't answer either of my questions.